everyone, and welcome to our special Field View episode of FP Next, powered by John Deere. I'm one of your co-hosts for this farmer and rancher-driven podcast, Sarah McNaughton, and I'm here with Kurt Arns.
Hi, Sarah. Yes, we're powered by John Deere, so for all of your equipment and technology needs, see your local Deere dealer. So, Sarah, have you been getting out some evenings in on some team roping scene these days? I mean, the weather's been pretty darn nice.
I definitely have been. There's been a few days our arena's gotten rained out and has some standing water in it, but pastures are super nice and green from those spring rains.
Yeah, I mean, spring has sprung, so everything looks nice. My dad used to say he loved this time of year because everything was either green or back when, everybody did a lot of tillage, it was either green or black. The soil was turned and the pastures were all green, but with no-till, we don't use that as quite as much. So, but the green is nice.
Right.
It's spring and the weather is finally kind of coming around.
Yeah.
So to get to our topic, we had an earlier podcast about crop biologicals, and we dubbed it the Wild Wild West. But I think when we talk about our topic today, that is, carbon practices, carbon payment programs, that might be even wilder and maybe harder to understand than crop biologicals. Farmers are interested in learning more about these programs, how to get paid a little extra for conservation practices like cover crops, reduced or no-till, intense management of inputs and other practices. We hear about carbon pipelines to try to help ethanol plants reduce a carbon footprint. Everywhere we look, we're talking about carbon in one form or another.
So, besides our roles at Farm Progress, of course, we're always talking about carbon, but every day when I go out to chore and feed horses, I drive past a little yard sign that reads something about stopping the carbon pipeline and stopping the implementation of eminent domain because, of course, North Dakota, Nebraska, South Dakota, Iowa, Minnesota, all of our states up here have a big carbon pipeline project going in. And Kurt, you and I have both written stories in the past about the farmer perspectives of the carbon pipelines that are going through the states, and you're actually putting together an entire carbon package for Farm Progress, talking about how farmers can get paid, how to understand it. And since you guys all covered so well, I'm excited to finally get in on covering it today with our guest today of talking about how to put carbon to work on your farm and get paid for it too.
Yeah, before I ever wrote anything about carbon, when I was farming, 20 years ago, we were involved in a carbon sequestration program through the Center for Rural Affairs here in Nebraska. It was basically a network of local farmers in Northeast Nebraska working to, try to adopt new conservation and carbon friendly practices like cover crops, like companion crops, small grains, reduced tillage, and on and on. And then grazing, intensive grazing was also really a big part of that, sequestration project at that time. So I learned a lot about that back then. And then just recently in March, I interviewed Lucas Fricke, who's an East Central Nebraska farmer, about his participation in a number of carbon payment programs, including Truterra. And Lucas told me that as long as you're already recording data on the number of passes you're making in the field, cover crop practices, reduced tillage, participating in these carbon payment programs is really not that hard. He called it a no-brainer. But there is something to it. There's something to understand about it. And Betty Haynes, who is an associate editor with Prairie Farmer, wrote a story recently about our guest today, and where he talked about carbon offsets, building soil health, helping farmers determine what they really need to know about carbon in 2024.
Yeah, Kurt. And there's a lot of conversations going on about carbon in agriculture, from emissions to pipeline intensity scores and being carbon negative. But through all those conversations, finding out how to get paid for carbon might get lost in the jumble. And so Mitchell Hora is a seventh generation farmer in Washington, Iowa, and is the founder of Continuum Ag, which helps farmers profit from improved soil health. He's super knowledgeable about the subject, and I think he could answer a ton of our questions on this. So welcome Mitchell to FP Next.
I'm hoping to answer the questions anyway. There's a lot to this, but yeah, you guys have teed it up well here so far, and excited to be here.
So Mitch, before we get into the carbon conversation, we always like to start off asking our guests a few off-topic questions. So tell us a little bit about your farm around Washington in Iowa, and how did you found your business, Continuum Ag?
Yeah, my family's been doing a lot of these practices. Sounds like you have been too, Kurt. My family farms in Southeast Iowa, Washington County. This year will be 151 years we've been farming here in Washington County. And we've been really focused on building soil health for a long time. My family's been using no-till since 1978. We've been using cover crop since 2013, and I started continuum ag in 2015 to help family farms like mine to quantify soil health. We were using the Haney soil health test a lot. We started building software. Then from there, that's our main focus of the company today is our topsoil software. It's an online platform at topsoil.ag. But we've expanded beyond just the soil data to really holistically helping to implement regenerative practices and quantifying outcomes such as carbon intensity. But really, what it boils down to is our mission is to help family farms improve their profitability via improving their soil health. We've seen the wild west of carbon credit programs and this talk of carbon over the last multiple years. And I've been personally involved since 2019 and have seen it from a lot of different angles. But I think I don't know if all the dust is settling yet, but I think we're starting to kind of see some folks having some success. We're seeing a lot of pivots, and I'm excited to share where I think the puck is going. And where I think the puck is going is in regards to quantifying our carbon intensity and being able to get farmers more flexibility. But that's just one outcome. And again, like my whole focus here is we need to build soil health. We need to improve family farm profitability. I just think that these CI things is a really key way that we can get that done and get it done at big time scale.
Awesome. And then tell us a little bit about how planting on your family farm has been there in Iowa. I know there's a lot of delays in many parts of the country. Up here, there's been a lot of rain delays. How's it been going on your farm?
Yeah, it feels like we've been in planting season for a long time, and it's because we have been more than a month now. We're recording this on May 20th, and we are all done with corn. We finished up yesterday. I planted all weekend. We're recording this on a Monday. I planted corn all weekend, which was great, and we were planting corn into 4 to 5 foot tall cereal rye. Some of it was 6 foot tall. It was huge. It's headed out. It's dropping pollen. It is way later than what we would like to be planting corn into. It's really scary stuff, but we're confident that we're going to be okay. We're putting on starter fertilizer. We're going to burn down the cover crop with liquid 32% with the herbicide, which is one of the tricks that we've learned to be successful. We're going to really monitor for pests, and we're going to continue to manage our nitrogen because we've thrown out of whack our carbon to nitrogen ratio, and we want to make sure that we're being successful here. But we do have one field of beans left to get planted, so 80 acres of beans left to do. We're supposed to get some rain here today, so depending on what happens with that, hoping to be done by the time this podcast actually goes live.
Then it's relief time. Then you always feel good when planning is completely done, you know. But you sounds like you're at least on the home stretch, even though it's running pretty late, especially for you folks. I mean, up in my country, planning can carry on, but in your area, I mean, what would be your normal time to be done planning?
We're actually right at normal time right now. It's just that the last couple of years we've basically planted everything in April. So relative to the last couple of years, we feel like we're behind. But actually, in the grand scheme of things, we're actually kind of right on normal pace from the reports that I've seen. So we're sitting okay. I mean, I don't think guys are getting too terrible worried, but it was just kind of a lot of concerns because the cover crops this year are maturing way faster than normal, just because of the warm, wet spring that we have had here. That these cover crops are really taking off and growing over the winter time. In my neck of the woods, we got a lot of snow this winter, so that really helped to keep those cover crops insulated and protected over the winter time. And now they've been really taken off, and they're probably 2, almost 3 weeks earlier along in terms of their maturity than what we normally would see, which is going to help a lot on our relay crop. We're actually going to harvest some of our cereal rye over the top of growing soybeans. My beans are already at V1 and looking really good. The rye is now pollinating, and we'll be harvesting that rye over the top of the growing soybeans in a couple of weeks. But on the corn, we're getting it all killed. And a good chunk of our corn we did get planted in a timely manner and got the cover crop terminated, and that corn looks awesome. It's about V2 and really taken off, and it looks good. But it just takes management. All this stuff takes management, and I think as we see, we're going to see more and more farmers come to this soil health space, and more farmers encouraged to do things like reduce tillage and plant cover crops and change practices. I think it's inevitable that there's going to be more and more momentum in this space. I think we're already seeing it. I definitely am already seeing it at Continuum Ag. We're gearing up for it. Not only trying to make sure that the data tools are there and the market opportunities are there, but also the technical support. Because doing this stuff, it is different. It does take more management. You can absolutely screw it up. And I know that because I've done it. I've screwed up about everything you can screw up in utilizing these cover crops. But we've been able to utilize data and learning from others to overcome those obstacles and do better. And that's where, like, even this year, planting into some adverse conditions, we know that we're going to be fine. And we're ready for it. We've built up our system to be resilient and looking forward to the rest of the year.
Mitch, we're always hungry around here, so we like to ask this question to many of our guests. And so next time we're traveling around Washington, what's your favorite place to grab a burger?
Oh, man. I got to give a shout out to anyone that knows me, and especially my local people that love. I got to give a shout out to Commanders Bar and Grill in Brighton, Iowa. It's pretty great. It's our local hole in the wall bar. Um, so I'll give a shout out to that. Um, Other than that, here I guess got to give a shout out to like Dairy Mart too over in Ainsworth, my hometown, Ainsworth, Iowa. Ice cream over at the Dairy Mart and some cheese balls. Yeah, big props there.
We always love a good burger, and so all of our guests always share their favorites. So Kurt and I always joke we're gonna have to go on a burger tour just around the country to try all these good things, and maybe we'll have to throw some ice cream in there too.
100%.
Could you explain to our listeners a baseline about how modern carbon markets work? So we know there is a financial compensation that happens in the carbon market, but in that Prairie Farmer story, it explains that farmers need to know their carbon intensity scores and measure their carbon footprint per bushel in order to get that compensation. So how can farmers find out those scores?
Yeah, so this let's back up to what you were just starting at, which is okay, the overview of the carbon space, which I think is really important. And Kurt, you had mentioned like Truterra, and you had mentioned some of these other programs. Okay, so we have to start there. There's three buckets that have really emerged in this carbon space. One of them is carbon offsets, which is what most farmers think about in the carbon space. A carbon offset is where we're creating a carbon credit, selling it into the voluntary carbon market where anybody could buy it. In order to sell into the carbon markets through these voluntary programs, you have to abide by the rules of the registry. And those rules and the registries are Vera, Gold Standard, Climate Action Reserve. Those type of groups develop the rules. And if you want to sell a carbon credit in their marketplace, you have to abide by their rules, which is where additionality comes from. You have to change practices. It's where permanence comes from. You have to store this carbon for typically most contracts are 100 years. You got to be storing the carbon. It's where the long-term contracts themselves come in, usually a 5 or 10 year program. And it's also, I think, what keeps the pricing kind of modest at best, because there's lots of different folks that are developing carbon credits and selling into these markets. And a lot of them can do it significantly cheaper than what we can do it here in ag. So it keeps the value of these credits kind of low. So that's carbon offsets, where you create a credit, sell it on the voluntary market. Then there's carbon insets, which is a big trend. Seeing a lot of companies go that way. That's a little bit more similar to like what Truterra is doing, developing carbon credits, internal, a little bit more flexibility, like using a look back or maybe a shorter term contract. We did a large project last year in this space where it was pretty decent money, a 1 year program. You didn't have to change practices, but you were getting compensated for some of the practices you were doing. But in a carbon inset program, we're still developing a carbon credit, which is 1 metric ton equivalent, or a CO2 equivalent, or a carbon credit. So offsetting, sell to anybody; insetting, sell internal to your supply chain, a little bit more flexibility. But what I'm talking about here today is carbon intensity, which is not developing a carbon credit. Rather, we are quantifying the carbon intensity per bushel. So it's measured in terms of grams of CO2 equivalent, or for the purpose of the tax credits, it's kilograms of CO2 equivalent per MMBTU, which is when we've converted the bushel into a biofuel. And the specific opportunity is within biofuels because there's some new emerging tax credits that are really enabling this to go, specifically 45Z. 45Z starts on January 1st, and it's a tax credit for biofuel producers to earn as they lower their carbon intensity. And they can lower their carbon intensity of their biofuels, talking ethanol, biodiesel, renewable diesel, and sustainable aviation fuel. So if you're producing those biofuels, you can purchase low carbon feedstock, corn, soybean, sorghum, whatever. You can buy those low carbon feedstocks and utilize the low carbon production as a means of lowering the carbon intensity of your fuel. And once we get some of the final IRS rules, which as we sit today, we still do not know all the rules, but the rules that were laid out in the Inflation Reduction Act, and the law that is governing all this, it looks like there could be some serious financial opportunity for biofuel producers to lower their carbon intensity, and they'll be looking for ways to collaborate with farmers. So we're quantifying the carbon intensity with the GREET model. So that's GREET, greenhouse gases, regulated emissions in energy and transportation, something along those lines. I always screwed up. But the GREET model, developed by the U.S. Department of Energy. So now we have an actual standard for quantification of the carbon footprint, emerging markets to incentivize the financial opportunity around lowering your carbon intensity, and farmers need to get their data organized and get ready, which is what we've really been doing. And Sarah, you were getting at it on the article that we did. Every single field is going to have a CI score, and guess what? You already have a CI score today. Whether you think that this is a load of crap or not, that's up to you. You can think whatever you want, but already every single bushel that we produce in this country, it already has a CI score. Our opportunity here is to prove that American agriculture, by and large, is already doing better than what the government gives us credit for. We can always continue to improve. All of us can continue to do better, but now we can put a number to that and set ourselves up for potential opportunities here to collaborate with our friends in the biofuel space, and we can go make some money together.
I always like to ask the first loaded question of the podcast. So thank you for answering that like very loaded question. And you kind of touched on this in answering that loaded question, but then how important are those biofuels and the 45Z tax credit in this discussion of actually getting paid for carbon?
You can't get paid without it. So the 45Z tax credit is a biofuel producer tax credit, the clean fuel production tax credit. So the biofuel producer gets the tax credit, not the farmer, not the pork producer, not the cattleman. The biofuel producer gets the tax credit, which is kind of creating some winners and losers in this space. But a third of our production goes to biofuel. It's a big, big market. They already have some of these standards built out, and the government incentivizing low carbon fuel production has, it's hitting on multiple components of the US's carbon footprint: transportation, energy, and agriculture. So it's kind of hitting multiple birds with one stone. And that's why they started with the biofuel side of things. Who knows what's going to happen with tax credits in the future? But yeah, today, the opportunity that's emerging, again, we don't know all the final rules yet, but the law was passed in August of 2022, and these tax credits are due to start on January 1st. So that means fuel being produced in 2025 or after will be subject to these tax credits. Fuel that we're producing in 2025 is going to be produced with the crop that we're growing this year, the 2024 crop. So therefore, the crop that we are planting right now is subject to these tax credits as well, which means the practices that we did for this crop are subject to these tax credits. And a lot of those practices we did last fall. The manure that we used, the tillage, the cover crop, the fertilizer, that all is part of your 2024 carbon footprint or carbon intensity. We got to get this data organized. The IRS has made some rules in a similar tax credit. It's called 40B, and they very clearly laid out the need for data rigor and verification to some pretty rigorous standards. So it is really going to require a big focus on data. And if you want to be compensated for the practices that you're doing, you're going to have to prove that you did the practices. And that's ultimately what we're trying to help farmers do here at Continuum.
So I'm wondering, Mitch, if you view carbon markets as the chicken or the egg. I mean, in other words, should we view these markets as an incentive to begin a new conservation practice on the farm, or should we be adding these practices anyway and view the market payments as just gravy and an incentive on top of a good decision? For many, I guess the payments are kind of secondary. They may help to offset the additional costs of trying a new practice, but most farmers care deeply about the soil and their land, and they just want, they may just view it as an incentive. So what do you think about that?
It's a really good point, and actually, it's probably changed a little bit here because of CI, right? So, in carbon credit programs, early adopters like my farm, that's been doing no-till for 4 decades and doing cover crops for more than a decade, we disqualified ourselves from carbon offsets because we weren't able to thoroughly trigger additionality, maybe make small changes, but it wasn't going to be worth it to document all this stuff and be locked into long-term contracts, because the change in carbon footprint was going to be minimal because we already made the changes. So if we were looking at carbon offsets, holding your breath and waiting to change practice would probably be kind of the right answer from a carbon credit perspective. Now, from a soil health perspective, I would still say no. Hey, don't worry about these carbon credit programs. Like, do the right thing for your soils and try to work with Mother Nature, not against her. Change. But yeah, in carbon offsets, you're better to wait on the sidelines. What I love with carbon intensity is it's not about what you did historically. It's not about what you're going to do in the future. It's about what is your carbon footprint of those bushels for that given year. And when you sell the bushels, you can sell the data with it, potentially being able to earn a premium. Again, we don't know yet, and there's only small scale pilot projects that are going on right now, paying farmers a couple cents a bushel. But once we get some of these IRS rules, there's potential for some serious financial opportunity and ability to collaborate. And again, it doesn't matter if you've been doing the practices for a long time or it's your first year. So I definitely now encourage farmers, like, get on the train here. Like, we're gonna need to do more of these things. They're not that scary, and they actually are better profitably and for resilience. Like, that's why I love this stuff. Like, I've seen it firsthand. My family's been doing these things for a long time without carbon credits, without government subsidies, utilizing some of these different programs and stuff. Like, we've participated in some government programs, but a lot of this stuff we've done on our own without government money, and sometimes without the safety net of crop insurance too, because of some of the aggressive experiments and things that we've been doing. Um, we've pushed ourselves outside the bounds of federal crop insurance in some cases, but now my encouragement is absolutely like, hey, you need to figure out how to make a cover crop work in your system. Reduce tillage, whether that be to strip till or no till, like that, either's fine. But dial in your fertilizer program. But most importantly, it's going to take data. So no matter what you do, document your farming practices. And plenty of folks listening to this, we're already into 2024, right? The practices, by and large, what's done is done. And maybe you did a cover crop, maybe not. It doesn't matter. All that matters today is document your farming practices, because it's the data that's going to create value. You can't just say, oh, sure, I did a cover crop, or sure, I only used 140 units of nitrogen fertilizer or 160 units or whatever. You can't just have hearsay. It's got to be legitimate and got to pass through verification. So it's going to take data and solid record keeping to get that done. And it's going to be at a level that we've never really seen before. And again, like, that's where we've been ramping up as aggressively as we have. That this is going to take a lot of data. But if the IRS rules come out the way that the law outlines, there should be enough financial opportunity to more than warrant the additional work of keeping good records.
So, if there are farmers who want to get into carbon, they're not already using some of these practices like we've talked about, which seem to be the most popular for farmers to jump into these programs using? Is it cover crops, reduced tillage? Is there other ones?
Yeah, cover crops is the biggest one to reduce your CI score in the GREET model, manure, and that's for most counties. So it's county by county based, but for most counties, cover crop is the biggest opportunity. Using manure is actually a huge one as well, because the Department of Energy views it as a byproduct of the livestock industry. It, of course, has a carbon and a biological value directly to it, and it can be utilized to offset your synthetic fertilizer purchases. Synthetic fertilizers have a really big carbon footprint to them. So manure is actually a kind of a big really big opportunity to consider. But then, yeah, no till or strip till is big, so reducing your synthetic fertilizer, but also just growing your yield. Basically, think of this carbon intensity or think of your carbon footprint as every pass across the field has some emissions to it, right? We're burning diesel fuel, maybe we're disturbing the soil, maybe we're applying a pesticide or a fertilizer that has a carbon footprint due to its manufacturing and due to how it's going to interact in the soil. So think of every pass across the field has a carbon footprint, and you divide that by your yield, divide it by the outcome that you're spreading that carbon footprint across your production. So that's why I like this too. We still have to be productive in agriculture. We've got to be able to continue to supply the world with the products that we supply, but we need to do it in a more environmentally friendly manner. And today we're talking about carbon intensity, but I'm not sold that it's going to be carbon intensity long term. But I am sold that we're going to have to document our farming practices, have that pass through a verification, and an array of different environmental outcomes are going to be calculated. Could be carbon intensity, could be biodiversity, could be water quality, could be different nutrient density type of outcomes in the future. But nonetheless, our story is part of the story of the next person down the supply chain. And they're going to need our data as they work to meet their sustainability goals and market to the consumer or to their shareholders.
Cover crops seem to be catching on across the country. The latest numbers coming in show solid growth in the number of acres in the U.S. under cover crops. It is in the farm news every day. So folks in the western regions of our areas across Nebraska, Kansas, and the Dakotas on west struggle with cover crops a little, just getting them started and choosing the right mix to do the job without killing soil moisture for the next crop. Are there any tips for folks who are still struggling with ways to adopt and adapt cover crops into their cropping rotations?
Yeah. I mean, there's a balancing act to all this stuff. I mean, and again, like utilizing these cover crops or building soil health, it takes more management. Absolutely. But I think we got to be thinking about the long term resiliency here, right? These water issues that some of the listeners are facing, like, it's not going to get better, guys. Like, we have to play with the cards that Mother Nature deals us. And so I think about this just as when we do have moisture, like in a year like this, all right, let's let that cover crop keep growing. Let's let it really build some biomass, really sequester carbon, really feed the microbes because we got the moisture. In years where it's dry, like last year, we were incredibly dry, and we need to get our cover crops killed earlier so that they're not taking that precious moisture away from our actual cash crop. But maximize the gains when we have the moisture, when we have the right environment, mitigate the losses when we don't. And I think over time, continue to build into the right direction and be thinking about this over the long term that if you're in a really dry area, we got to figure out how do we maximize every drop that does come when it comes, meaning we got to have good water infiltration, which takes building soil structure. Yeah, we've got to have water holding capacity, organic matter, again, structure to the system. We got to utilize that cover crop as an offensive management tool to help to actually get that moisture in the ground. When things get hot and dry, we can terminate that cover crop and it insulates the soil, mitigating evaporation, keeping the soil temperature in check, and really locking that moisture in. And when we're too wet, keep that cover crop alive. It's going to wick out excess moisture and transpire it into the atmosphere and pump back down into the soil carbons to feed the microbes. That's what they're doing. They're exuding those sugars down into the soil to feed the microbes and drive nutrient cycling gains that we can capitalize on. So it's just utilizing these tools as offensive management systems. Again, mitigate against any potential losses. We got to be profitable here as we go about this. But in a lot of places too, we're going to have to think about diversifying if we can, or interseeding covers, or utilizing different windows of time to really try to get more creative. That it's not going to work perfect every year. So we got to make sure that, again, we're working within the cards that are dealt. And we've had to work through that as well. Last year was super dry. This year was super wet. And we got to adjust, make sure that we keep playing our cards right. And live to keep fighting the good fight again next year.
I know so I'm from like the northern river valley of like sugar beet country, potato country, and you always see a lot of the blowing soil in the spring. And I think that's one of the biggest things that I think a lot of farmers are maybe paying more attention to is keeping that soil covered and keeping it protected. But with all the carbon programs and payment programs out there, how can farmers choose something that's going to work for their own farm? Do you recommend them to just kind of look at all of them, do a lot of investigation on maybe picking two? I know there's been some hesitancy from many farmers of signing on to some of these early programs. They worry about the long term contracts and how these practices are measured. So, what should the strategy be for farmers getting started?
Yeah, no, I love it. Uh, I'm pretty pessimistic on a lot of these things, unfortunately, and I'm deep into it, and I'm still like super skeptical, super pessimistic. On my farm, we did a carbon inset project last year. It's the only time we've ever done an actual carbon program, and it was because it met these criteria that I'll share with you all. So as I'm approaching this, I'm looking at what's going to be the best bang for my buck, right? The best financial opportunity for the workload, meaning how much data and how much practices and how much change do I have to do versus what's going to be the financial reward. So, number one, got to pay the bills, got to make ROI sense. Number two, I don't like any long term contracts at all. Like, I'm not signing anything that locks me into any future contract at all. And even like what we're doing at Continuum Ag with CI, there's no actual long-term contract. There's no actual being locked into anything. All we're doing is helping farmers they can utilize our software to get their score, document their practices. But farmers, you own your data, you own your score. There's no contract that you're signing or locking yourself into anything. Completely flexible. So ROI, no long-term contracts, nothing looking forward. And then it's got to be with somebody that you actually trust and that you actually want to end up doing business with and stuff. And I think we've kind of seen a little bit of the dust settle in that space, right? Of kind of, some programs are working out and other ones not so much. And there's been some backlash on them. So, what I love about, this CI thing and why I'm so focused on that is that it has the best opportunity for ROI and you don't have to be locked into any practices. It's fully flexible and there's no contracts. You own your data, you own your score, you own your bushels. When you want to sell the bushels and sell the data, you're done. And now the next person owns it. There is no long-term contract stuff to them. And the trust piece, I mean, obviously we want farmers to trust us that we are farmers ourselves. I built this software and built all this stuff for my own family farm. I wanted to know what my CI score was when I saw the Inflation Reduction Act in 2022 and dug into this 45Z thing. I just knew like that this was so right for our farm and for our opportunity. Even though most of my corn goes to feed pigs, most of my corn doesn't go to the ethanol plant. However, some of that might have to change, or we might be able to get creative in some other ways and still make this work within some of our local markets. But I just knew that now I could actually quantify my farm's carbon footprint with the GREET model. And I knew that other farms really needed this. It provides more flexibility that you don't have to do a small check the list set of practices. There's a bunch of things that you can do. And farmer, you get to choose who you want to send it to. In our system, farmers own their data. If they want their local agronomist to be a dealer, they can share the data with their local agronomist, and they can get access to topsoil. Um, if they and then at the end of the year, we're sending the data to the verification body. We work with a third party verifier who looks at the data, but the farmer opts into that and to share your data even with that third party verifier. Then farmer, you own these certificates and you'll have one certificate for every bushel, and you get to choose what ethanol plant or what elevator that you want to sell your grain and sell these certificates to. So uh, let you be in control of who do you trust and who do you want to work with, and whether it be continuum or just document your practices really well in whatever system that you're using. But just know, like, it's going to have to go through some verification and have to get these scores, and that's what we're trying to help farmers to be proactive to get that done.
When I interviewed Lucas Fricke, he said it wasn't all that difficult to quantify what you were doing if you were already collecting data on the number of passes through the field, nutrient management, tillage practices, and cover crops. I mean, would you say it's easy to participate? I mean, what types of data do you need to collect? And how hard is it to track?
It's gonna be a lot of work. It's gonna be a lot of data. I mean, we gotta document everything, and that's why we're enrolling farmers in our program now. We call it CI certification, and we charge $5 an acre. And doing that to say, hey, we need you to help us here and document your practices. We will help you and we'll get you agronomists, or we'll work with your local agronomist if you have one that you want to work with, and we'll help to document all this stuff. And that couple dollars an acre includes the cost of verification and connectivity. It's an all-in cost. Really trying to make this work for farmers at scale. But yeah, it's going to be documented everything. So I'm talking about receipts and shape files to back up every pass across the field. Planting applications, fertilizer, cover crop manure, yields, pesticides. It's a lot of stuff. But what I like about our approach anyway is that we're documenting all of that data in our topsoil tool. Then we're submitting the data to a third party verifier, and only a subset of our farmers will then get audited and they'll really dig through your data. But then we're creating the CI certificate, your verified score. So when you want to sell your grain, all that the next company really needs is the score and the verification report. That's it. They don't need your actual data. You still own your actual data. Now, there might be programs where you can opt into sharing additional data, maybe earning additional premiums. There's lots of things that are emerging, but yeah, I mean, again, nobody's more skeptical in this stuff than me. And that's why, as a farmer, as an agronomist, why I started my own software is I wanted to protect my data. Nobody has more data in this system than me. And I want to make darn sure that I'm protecting it, that it doesn't end up getting utilized against me, and that I'm the one getting the value out of it for my own family farm. So just trying to enable that for other farmers as well. There's other companies I'm sure that are approaching things a similar way. That's great. There's massive opportunity in this space, and we can't do it all by ourselves. So we want to collaborate. And we just want to make sure that farmers have the resources that they need to document the practices. We've built a lot of API integrations and stuff, right? So we're connected with John Deere Ops Center, and connected with Climate Field View, and connected with all these existing platforms to make sure that we don't have to double enter data. And that's where we help you to just get all that pulled together, get it organized so it can pass through verification. But I think farmers think about the CI thing and the verification just like what organic farmers do. Organic farmers document all their farming practices. Then every year they have to go through an audit where the verifier comes out and checks all the records and gives them the stamp of approval that they are organic certified. Same type of thing here, except that we're not verifying did you meet grade yay or nay. We're verifying the actual score. So it's checking the math and substantiating that you did the practices with evidence, shape files, receipts, photos. It's going to take all the above. But again, that's where we're starting now. Spread out the workload. It's going to be a lot, but we're already collecting most of this data. We just need to get it organized so we can go through verification. And I believe that the financials are going to more than warrant this little bit of work.
I know that does sound like a lot on the data collection side. And we've had a great carbon conversation today. And I just wanted to touch on a couple things you have going on there at Continuum. It looks like you have an upcoming topsoil summit on June 3rd there in Iowa, as well as a CI chit chat that you host every week. But where else and what else can farmers get connected with you and the rest of the team to help with their carbon journey?
Yeah, when this comes out, check out continuum.ag, and under our events tab is Topsoil Summit, June 3rd. Gonna be awesome, really focused on CI. So we definitely encourage people to come and check that out. We'll have some of it recorded if you can't make it. But Topsoil Summit CI Chit Chat is every Tuesday morning where I answer your questions. You can find info on that at continuum.ag as well and get registered there. Doing all kinds of other webinars and stuff too. It's tons of material on my YouTube page. Search Continuum Ag on YouTube. You'll find us. Our podcast is the Topsoil Podcast, where all of our webinars and materials are also on our podcast. So lots of material out there. Would love to continue to have the conversations. If you want to find out your CI score, you can go to topsoil.ag and utilize the Billion Bushel Challenge code of BBC95 to get your score for just $25.
Well, that's it for this special field view version of FP Next powered by John Deere. Thanks, Mitch, for sharing all of your insights into our topic today. And we want to give you best wishes for a great growing season.
Thanks for having me on. A lot of fun, a lot for us to keep learning, but excited to be on this journey with everyone here in American Ag.
And to our listeners, we want to thank you for tuning in to this episode of FP Next, allowing us into your tractor cab, your truck, on your farm, and in your shop and fields. A special thank you goes out to our digital production and marketing team members who put in a lot of work with us. And we will add links to the story about Mitch from Betty Haynes, as well as other links from Mitch. Look for those story links in the episode descriptions. And if you want to be sure not to miss any top stories, sign up for our Farm Progress text blasts, which bring the hot stories right to your inbox.
You can sign up for those text alerts by texting FARM, FARM, to 20505. Be sure to follow Farm Progress on social media to stay up to date with ag news and more, and check out the digital edition of your regional publication at farmprogress.com. Be sure to tune into our next episode of FP Next for a deep dive episode where we're talking with special guest Jessie Jarvis, who is a third generation rancher in southern Idaho, and she is a CEO and founder of the West and a podcast host of Leaders of the West. So we're super excited to hear everything she has to share about beating the agriculture job hunt.
Yes, Jesse will be talking about how to get a job in agriculture, how to navigate that job market, and put your best foot forward. So that's her area of expertise. And it's just one of the things we'll be talking about with her next time.
I'm super excited for you guys all to hear Jessie share her number one piece of advice for those looking for that perfect job in agriculture, so make sure you don't miss it. You can follow along with FP Next by listening and subscribing on your favorite podcast platform, YouTube, or at Farm Progress Online, and be sure to leave us a review if you enjoyed the show.
Sarah, you always say 5 stars or nothing.
Absolutely. Remember, if it's agriculture, your friends at Farm Progress have you covered. Here's wishing you high yields and good weather. We'll see you next time.